all the common sense things that people would say, like, if you buy a lottery ticket, the odds of winning are so many millions to one, that isn't going to solve your problem. I would be focused on that 1 in 57 million chance. I was letting myself down, my family down, and just what a horrible level of betrayal and how low I felt about that, and how low I would have judged somebody else who was doing that. At that point, I realised that I wasn't in control of my own self or my own actions, that I had completely lost control, and that I was damaging people I loved, and that I was morally so bankrupt at that point.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the One Day at a Time podcast. Today's guest is Marcus B. He's a compulsive gambler in recovery, and his last bet was October the 7th of 2022. Marcus, thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me on, Rob. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be on your channel. Been following it throughout my recovery, so yeah, I'm delighted to be here and just to have the opportunity to share a bit of my story, even if it only reaches one person and makes a difference in someone's life. Then it's paying forward what I've received from others.
I love that. And that's one of the driving factors when we first spoke, probably about 2 years ago now, about the channel and about growing the message here online. In fact, for those in the audience, Marcus was one of the very first people to not only follow the accounts that we've made here, but to reach out, and was one of the motivating factors in the beginning to say, okay, maybe this can be a legitimate thing and I should move forward with it. So thank you for that. And it's come full circle. And now we get to hear your story on the channel. How about we just start from the beginning of your gambling? What really happened in the beginning? How'd we end up here today?
So I mean, I grew up as many people did, in a community and a family that sort of endorsed gambling or didn't see it as a problem. There were members of my family who were gamblers in their own forms, but none of them really were compulsive gamblers. For me, growing up, it was like every time there was any activity like that, something in me lit up. I was always very good at maths and ahead of my year at maths. Some teachers would say I was gifted or talented at maths. And with odds and statistics and watching my nan play bingo, there was a spark in me towards them. And then there was never any explanation of the dangers that these paths, that where they could end up. I remember going on holidays, always looking forward to a holiday, not so much for the beach, but for the amusement arcade. And prying me out of that amusement arcade. But that would be a place where I would have tantrums at a young age because I did not want to leave the flashing lights and the sound of the coins falling and that just thrill and excitement that I perceived was there. The films that I watched growing up, James Bond, he gambles a lot. He does. And he's a hero figure. I read books. I read a lot. And I read things like King Arthur and Robin Hood, but I also read Roald Dahl, and there's a story called The Wonderful World of Henry Sugar. And that had quite a big impact on me, and the character in that story sort of develops a way to beat casinos consistently, and he then uses their money to start orphanages. And again, he's this hero character, and for many, many years, that was all I wanted to do. That was all I wanted to be, was Henry Sugar. I wanted to tour the world, take him from the rich and give him to the poor, very Robin Hood and well-intentioned, I thought, within my own heart. And yet it led me over time into dark places where have ever thought I would have found myself doing. I think as I went through, sort of grew up and going through school, I did start to struggle with fitting in with people and feel that alienation, and gambling sort of became more and more accessible as I grew older. Some of the other lads, once I was in college, were doing it as well, and it became a little bit social. It became a little bit of a way of fitting in with some of the lads, and there were occasions where it wasn't a problem, where I wasn't obsessed. It became more and more and more of a regular thing, and it became a thing that I was doing by myself. It became a thing that I was doing to the last pound. All the questions that you'll get asked in the 20 questions, if we're brave enough to walk into a GA room to analyse whether or not we are compulsive gamblers, one by one by one, and this is something I've recognised now I'm in recovery, the position I got myself into, but I didn't do it overnight. It was 1,000 tiny decisions. It was the forming of habits. It was repetitive actions. Those led me into vicious circles of isolation and misery and loneliness, using gambling to escape that. And then that gambling creating financial problems, which meant that I couldn't go out and socialize. So then I become isolated, and these vicious circles that I spent many, many, many years unable to escape and unable to find a way out of those patterns. And gradually, slowly but surely, inch by inch, I feel I dug my way into a private, personal hell of mine that I'd constructed, where I had very few friends and family around me, because I'd pretty much managed to push everybody away or beg, borrow, and steal off them to their limit of tolerance of me. I've put myself through self-neglect, self-hate, some really negative talk. I've asked myself questions over the years, over 10,000 times perhaps, where I've said, why am I so stupid? Why am I broken as a person? Why am I unable to control this when everybody else seems to be able to? That, again, it's very isolating to feel alone and the only person that cannot function as a normal human being would or does. The relief on finally reaching a rock bottom that took me into a GA room, the relief at finding out that I was not alone, um, that was a huge thing for me.
What was it that got you to realize that it was time to finally leave this in the past? Was there a particular day, or was it the accumulation of many days?
I actually identified myself as a compulsive gambler or as a gambling addict probably in my early 20s. So I kind of admitted that I had a problem at that point, and I was quite open and honest with people in my life that I was a compulsive gambler, that I was a gambling addict, and that was who I was and what I did.
Mm,
And I don't think that at any point I had any belief that I could change that. I
mm,
thought that was just who I was and that was what my life was going to be all about. I used to go in bookmakers' shops and see elderly gentlemen that are pensioners who are gambling very, very small, like 20 pence bets, and drinking the free coffee that the bookmakers offer to keep you in there. I sort of developed over time a sort of hatred for those guys. And it was purely based on the fact that I could not see myself escaping that trajectory, that was who I was going to end up being,
wow,
and I hated it, and therefore I started to really resent them for
mm,
reminding me that that was where I was headed. Over the years, gambling tested my resolve and my will, and enslaved me, and
mm,
was a very cruel mistress at times. For a very, very, very long time, I would not give up on her. I did not believe that there was any other way. I believed that the only way out was the unicorn big win, that eventually, sooner or later, I was going to get a big win that would not only clear all my debts, but set me up for the rest of my life and take the pressure off. That was the only way out that I could conceive of and believe of. And part of that is because the people that I was associating with and mixing with were people who would accept me as that version of me,
mm,
people who I could sort of trade off with, their sins for my sins. And so there was no expectation, and there was no mixing with an evidence of recovery in my life. I didn't have people in my life who had demonstrated recovery. And
mm,
until I went into recovery rooms and started mixing with people who had years of recovery, again, it was a game changer, because one, I could see it and believe in it, and two, you are who you're with. So if I
mm.
start mixing with five people in recovery, I'll become the sixth person in recovery. While I
Yeah.
was just the fifth person talking about the football odds for the weekend,
Mm.
I'd surrounded myself with the wrong people. So it is people, places, and things.
Can we talk about something real for a minute? If your gambling has started to feel less like fun and more like stress, Trust me, you're not alone. Millions of us know what it's like to say, just one more bet, or feel that urge that's really difficult to explain. That's why I'm excited to tell you about eVive, a sponsor of today's video. Think of it as having a recovery companion right in your pocket, someone who actually understands what you're going through. No lectures, no pressure, just practical tools and genuine support when those challenging moments hit. Download eVive now and you'll get guaranteed free access through 2026. Not a trial or a limited version, but the complete platform, completely free. Because eVive believes that everyone deserves access to support that works for them. Download eVive today and take the first step towards changing your relationship to gambling. eVive is only available in select countries.
I think going back to your original question there, though, we're talking about rock bottoms, and it's not easy for me to talk about my rock bottom, to be honest, but I will, and I hope everybody understands that if I do get emotional, it is a difficult thing. The truth is that when you talk about shame, and it is reaching a point where I had done things that I could not recognize myself as doing, that I would never ever have thought. And I broke promises to myself. And it seemed like the amount of abuse that I'd put myself through over the years, I could tolerate that. Nobody else is suffering. It's only me. But then there was an event that happened which meant I became responsible for a vulnerable adult who's a member of my family. And I took on caring responsibilities for that person, and part of that was looking after their finances. And I made promises to myself that no matter what, I wouldn't touch or use their finances. I knew that was wrong. They're a vulnerable person, they don't understand, and it was my job to protect them. And I am quite a protective person and a loyal person. That is the truth of who I am. But the addiction challenged that and compromised that to the point that I did use their finances. I took their money, I used their money, and there was two elements to it. One was the level of disgust at myself that I'd done that, and that it was someone I really deeply care for and love, and I was letting myself down, my family down, and just what a horrible level of betrayal, and how low I felt about that, and how low I would have judged somebody else who was doing that. But then the other element of it was that it was really breaking like a big red barrier for me. And I was actually having this really internal argument, which had become very, very aware that there were two different people really having an argument inside of me. There was one person who couldn't take this anymore and was begging the other to stop, and was making promise after promise that I will not load on again. This is the last time I load credit on. I will not do this again. And the other person within me was winning that argument again and again. And I was literally finding myself a slave to loading on more and more money and credit against my own will. And that was quite scary. So at that point, I realised that I wasn't in control of my own self or my own actions anymore, that I had completely lost control, and that I was damaging people I loved, and that I was morally so bankrupt at that point that I was doing things I was going to find very difficult to forgive myself for, ever. And even with all that, it was actually being discovered and having to discuss that with my mum that took me to a room.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I know it's a very difficult thing to reflect on the past like that, but I think a lot of people can likely relate to the feeling of breaking promises to themselves. You know, we say that we're going to do one thing and then we turn around and do another, and that repeats itself for years and years. I think that a lot of people that are at this point in the video can probably see that in themselves or maybe in a loved one who's struggling. It is very valuable that you're sharing this. And once again, I appreciate that. For someone that's watching this now that's maybe not familiar with problem gambling, gambling addiction, you'd mentioned earlier in the video that when you were growing up, you were very gifted in math and statistics. What led you to then keep gambling, knowing that the odds of such a payout that you were hoping for were really slim to none? Reconcile it for someone maybe that doesn't fully understand the addiction.
Well, I could speak for myself, but also from my experience now that I've accrued with other compulsive gamblers in recovery, and it's certainly a misconception to think of compulsive gamblers as stupid. They're certainly not, and I truly, despite having asked myself that question all those times, I am not a stupid person. Logically, and mentally, I'm quite capable. I'm a county level chess player, so I definitely have got some ability to think clearly, straight, logically. What I would say is that gambling and gambling addiction, ultimately, as the rooms teach us, is an emotional illness. And while I've got high levels of intelligence for maths tests, my emotional intelligence hadn't really developed from the time in teenage years where I started to use gambling and other addictions to mask feelings and to numb and to avoid and to escape from that sense of not being comfortable with who I was and with that I couldn't fit in with people the way I wanted to. Um, So as soon as I started doing addictive behaviours, I stopped that growth and progression. So for many, many years, that those circles, those constant vicious circles that we talked about, um, there's no growth in any of those. So it's just an emotional roller coaster of highs and lows, of dopamine and then cortisol, the stress of the fear of being caught and the financial problems I've just created and the work I missed and the argument that I've had and all the fallout from compulsive gambling over a long period of time. So there's just that roller coaster going on the whole time. And it's almost like there's a delusionary bubble that I was living in where all the common sense things that people would say, like, well, if you buy a lottery ticket, the odds of winning are so many millions to one, that isn't going to solve your problem. I would be focused on that 1 in 57 million chance. It is a very strange inverted reality bubble that addiction, or and particularly gambling addiction, builds up.
It's fascinating. I mean, I know the feeling, so I asked that as a hypothetical. And another hypothetical I wanna ask you is, like, now that you're 2.5 years since your last bet date, and you seem to be making all of this emotional progress, you have all this intelligence, all this practical knowledge, why is it that you couldn't go back to gambling now and approach it with a different light?
I have been in recovery rooms since the year 2020. So this is my fifth year in the rooms. And I did achieve a period of abstinence when I first joined the rooms. Um, then there was a few things that hindered my recovery. I allowed personalities to cloud the issue ahead of principles, which is a thing that we say in the rooms. It is principles ahead of personalities. I let myself down really by allowing that to affect my attendance at Gamblers Anonymous meetings. Once I had faded away from the rooms and stopped attending regularly, and the gaps between my attendance got longer and longer, the thoughts of having a controlled bet returned, promises of just a small amount, just one. Once I placed that first bet, it turned into a second and into a third, and the progressive nature of the illness absolutely demonstrated itself in my experience. I was gambling as much as I ever had within 30 days. I was back to full, every day consumed and obsessed by gambling, money, gambling, lies, gambling, money, money, lies, stats, odds. It was all consuming. And to go back into the rooms a second time was difficult. It was difficult. It took some humility to do that, but in a way it was easier to accept that that was the only way. It's the only thing that has ever helped me. I have tried by myself to stop gambling many, many times over the years and achieved some periods of abstinence. But without that help, support, accountability, practical wisdom, experience, strength, and hope that I get from a room, without that community around me, um, I personally cannot do it alone. I find myself unable to keep that addict at bay. It's cunning, baffling, and powerful, and it's looking for the opportunity. It's in the back of me mind all the time, looking for that opportunity. So if I don't keep myself busy and keep myself accountable and keep myself with the right people, places, and things around me, and make a conscious effort every day that it's a recovery day. It is one day at a time, but there are no days off in recovery.
Right.
Every single day I've got to turn up and do some recovery. I have to start my day with a daily reflection and put myself in that mindset.
Mm,
Um, and they're just for today's where I'm practicing a skill, but whichever skill that is, whether it's practicing to take the world as it is for the day, or whether it's practicing to do a good turn undiscovered for the day,
mm,
the final one is always, and just for today I shall not gamble. And that is it is one day at a time, but it is for the rest of my life one day at a time. There's no coming away from recovery. If I'm not putting the time and effort into recovery, it's going back into addiction.
mm. This has been a fascinating conversation for me for a couple reasons. The first being like I make content every day. So I'm doing something in relation to remembering the harm that gambling brought into my life. But I feel like I've definitely slipped away from the roots of it, and in a bad way. So when I'm doing these conversations, I'm doing a lot of listening, but I felt like I talked myself through so much of my own story that I'm like hesitant now on a regular basis to have that daily reflection that you're talking about. And I'm moving away from the roots of it. So this was actually a very grounding conversation, separate to even just making a podcast with you for myself. But it's fascinating too that like as we stay away from gambling, our brains reset themselves so that we get regular levels of dopamine again from other things. So we begin to enjoy going out with friends, going for walks, going to the gym. There's enjoyment to it. But we don't see that reset with our levels of craving for the gambling as it relates to like once we start. As you just showed, it was like we don't go back to the $1 spins. We don't go back to the 50-cent spins because we're going back and we're jumping right back off from where we started or from where we left off, excuse me. Uh, it's just it's so hard to understand what's going on in our minds. Gambling can absolutely wreck your finances, but you don't have to fix it alone. At GamFin, they help people struggling with gambling debt to take back control. Whether it's budgeting, debt management, or rebuilding your financial future, their experts are here with real solutions. No judgment, just support. Your money doesn't have to define you. Visit gamfin.org today and take the first step toward financial recovery by meeting with one of their financial advisors. Hope starts here.
The more that I am in rooms and the more that I watch some fantastic podcasts and TED Talks. I've watched Brené Brown on vulnerability, and there was a lady that I watched who talked about the lessons from a mental hospital, and she talked very openly about her addictions. I watch people like David Bayer, who is a success coach, but he's been through a 12-step program and refers to it a lot in his content. And I've become Teal Swan. I love watching Teal Swan content, and so this new passion in me that I've discovered in recovery of starting to understand myself, understand my thinking, understand psychology, and understand the psychology and thinking of others as well, and what I'm learning and the light that I bring out of my darkness, how that can help others, and really starting to learn some skills to be able to do that. And that's become something quite important to me, none of which I anticipated when I first walked into a room.
Hey,
I,
fair enough.
I'll be very honest with you. When I first walked into a room, I thought that I was going to do 6 or 12 weeks
Mhm.
and that I would then be cured. I could go on my merry way. I had no idea that I was committed to a journey of self discovery that would take years.
And we were talking before the call started about something that's been really important to you in your recovery journey as well, and it's the promises that come from the 12-step program. I wanted to give you the opportunity here to maybe talk about what they are, and if you'd like to read them, go ahead.
Thank you, because there are people within my close circle from GA who introduced these promises to me, and they've come. The first time I heard them, I don't think I felt they were particularly relevant, but they've come to mean an awful lot to me. and it is true what it says within them about starting to experience these in half the time you think you will. I'm very aware that what we're doing here on this podcast, as much as sort of just two people mutually supporting each other in recovery, is we're putting a message out to other people as well. And part of that experience, strength, and hope that we can offer is a belief that if you are struggling or if you're in early days of recovery, that if you keep going and if you put the time and effort into yourself, if you accept that you need help and turn to the right people for that help, and that is organisations like Gamblers Anonymous, it is emailing Rob to get a help sheet, it is just opening yourself up to that help, then these promises is what's on offer. And some of these may not instantly strike a chord with people, but from my experience over time, these become more and more and more important to me. The promises reads, if we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. The feelings of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows, and self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook on life will change. Fear of people and economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but they will always materialize if we work for them. It does work if we work it. So work it because you are worth it.
I love that. And the one that jumps out to me, like, they're all fantastic, but the one that jumps out to me right away is to not forget the past. It's another reason why I'm documenting these conversations and making sure that we put these out, because very easily we could say, this thing happened, let's move on. But if we do that, we gain nothing from the negative experiences that we've had. And if we're able to remember the past, not let it just sink into oblivion, we can use that to help someone else with their future. And so that jumped out to me right away. Just wanted to share that.
I want to share something about your channels and your content if I can,
Of course.
which is relevant to addiction. It just painted a very visual picture for me. As you've said, we met each other quite early in our recoveries at the period that we're currently in excess of 2 years without placing a bet each. At that point, when I first tuned into Rob ODAAT on YouTube, there were a handful of videos.
Mhm.
It took me 2 or 3 seconds to scroll up from the top to the bottom and see all
Yeah.
the options. You are creating this content and you're creating it across multiple platforms. So you've got your Instagram and you're on Facebook and you're on YouTube and you're across all these platforms. And I can go onto those platforms now. And if I go onto your channel and as one of your subscribers, everybody, if you're not subscribed, you do need to subscribe to keep seeing the content. So if I go on there now and I start scrolling up, my finger's going up and up and up and up, and I'm watching this reel after reel after reel after reel, all these thumbnails of all these videos of all this content that you've produced over the last 2 years. And it's a volume of work. It's quite a significant thing. And what this makes me think is, like I said earlier, about I didn't get addicted in a day. It was a build up of a consistency of habit of one gamble on this in the morning and one gamble on that in the afternoon and what two in the evening on the uh, so maybe over the course of a day 6 7 8. And I think about
Mhm.
your content, maybe over the course of a day you load up 6 7. I get these little notifications, Rob's just put something new on Instagram, and so maybe 6 or 7 times a day. And then over the
Yeah.
course of 2 years, this huge wall, this
Mm.
huge amount of, and it's from these little actions being repeated. Addiction is like that.
Hmm.
Addiction is creating a picture or creating a life. And then what you've demonstrated so well is recovery is also like that. That
Hmm.
where I feel I dug my own hell inch by inch, day by day, and then I reached a point where I have been working at climbing out of that hell
Hmm.
1 inch at a time, 1 day at a time. I can look at your wall of all those videos, all that time and effort, and it made me reflect on how many meetings have I been to? How many hours have I put into my recovery? Writing my step work, the amount of time I've invested in actually writing things down and clearing my mind of how many conversations and how many podcasts and how many books and how much is all those little bits of effort and energy.
It's significantly better, and I appreciate you saying that. I think that, just recently when they were gonna ban TikTok, I went and I used this app to download all the videos on the page, and it said I think it's like 2,360 videos, and this was like a month and a half ago now, so it's somewhere around like 2,500 videos on TikTok, and those are just the shorts. So then there's all the YouTube videos. We're looking at just about like 3,000 videos over the last, 2 years, and, thank you for scrolling through. I hope you didn't watch all of them. That would have been but,
I may be your biggest fan, but I haven't got time to watch everything that you put
I
out.
can't imagine. But I appreciate you saying that, and it is has or rather it has been a bit pretty big switch for me. I've actually kind of recognized in myself that there is still a compulsion there. There's a compulsion to keep putting out content, to keep doing work. You know, in the process of trying to become a better person, I'm okay with the fact that I am now hooked to making content instead of making bets. You know, it's a better alternative for me in the short term as I progress towards that. But seeing some tangible process or some tangible results for work that you're doing was something that gambling never gave me. It was I either won and I felt happy for a few minutes, or I lost and I felt like I wasted my day. And eventually I would get to a wasted day. So it's like even if I have a unproductive or bad day now, it's like there's still something to show for it. And I appreciate you bringing that up because it means a lot.
Sort of think about that long term production of a life, a career, a video library of content.
Mm,
That learning to do that little bit at a time and not wanting the whole cake
mm,
at the first sitting. That's something that I'm beginning to learn through recovery. That
mm,
delay of gratification and that being willing to work for something and put time and effort in consistently towards a goal
mm,
and seeing that work, it kind of does help me not have that urge for the shortcut. Because for me,
mm,
gambling was in part a consistent effort to take a shortcut in life. And
mm,
the truth is there just aren't any. You get out what you put in, and if what you're putting in is nervous, anxious energy about where the next pound or dollar's coming from, and what you're putting in is lies and deceit and inability to be honest with yourself and with the people around you about who you are, what you're doing. You know, if that's
mm,
what you're putting into your life and into the universe around you consistently, that's what's going to show up. That's going to be your experience. And for me, it was, and it was horrible, and it was dark, and it was lonely, and there is like shame, regret, and so on. But that line from the promises that helps me a lot. That going through all that, I went through that for a reason, and I went through that because it has given me the ability to empathize with others that are in that situation, and
mm,
just to be able to offer them a little ray of light. If anybody out there thinks that they cannot make this change in their life, I will say, you know, I was an active, compulsive gambler, gambling every single day of my adult life for 25 years. And I have managed to make that change. So if I can do that, I am absolutely convinced. I'm not a special person. I'm just a person that took recovery seriously. And I promise you, whoever you are, wherever you are, no matter how lonely, black, dark, and low it feels right now, if you put time and effort into reaching out to the people that have got the experience, strength, and hope to share with you, the people in
mm.
recovery rooms, there is hope. and you can make a change. You can change your life.
Marcus, thank you so much for coming on and for continuously supporting the channel. Your story was awesome, and getting to go through those promises was something that we had not done yet on the channel that I think might resonate with a lot of people who've watched. If you're in the audience and you want to hear another story of someone who's in recovery from a gambling addiction, then check out this video and let's keep getting better together, one day at a time.
Thank you ever so much for having me on, Rob. Thank you.